afternoon, good evening to all of you wherever you are in the world. My name is Uzodinma Iwala, and I'm the CEO of the Africa Center here in New York City. I want to welcome you all today to this program, this very important program we're having called Gen xYZ, Unsilenced Voices Propelling Change Through Creative Power. Now, this program is about all of the events that have happened over the past month in Nigeria, where the youth has really been standing up for a greater democracy, protesting police brutality, protesting the devaluation of Black lives, even in our own country of Nigeria, and also saying, look, that we've had it, that we want change. For me as a Nigerian citizen living abroad, it's been very difficult to watch and see some of the things that have been happening on one hand, but on the other hand, it's been completely empowering from a distance. It's been heartening to see people stand up, take to the streets and say, you know, this is my country, I want change. And that message is something that we want to discuss here today with an esteemed panel of participants, change makers, tech folks in Nigeria who've really been working very hard to make sure that that change comes to our country. Now, I'm here just to really introduce the whole scope of everything, but my next job is actually to introduce our moderator, Seyitan Atigarin, who embodies the stereotype-breaking nature of the Nigerian youth. She is an award-winning TV presenter, producer, news anchor for the morning show on Arise News Television. And she's known for spotting the stories that encourage viewers to think more broadly about mentoring and how to succeed in the media industry. We should note that Arise TV was really the only news channel to give local major airtime coverage to the ENDSARS movement in Nigeria from the very beginning. And you know, in thinking about what has happened and how the change that we've been seeing in Nigeria has come, it's notable that Arise TV is also the news network in Nigeria run by a woman as well. So I want to thank Shay and Arise News for the work that they are doing. And also to Obiasika, Nkiru Balloon, and everyone from Africa Soft Power who is partnering with us at the Africa Center to bring this event to you. And with that, I'm going to turn over to Seyitan to take it away.
Thank you very much, Dr. Uzodinma Iwala. All right, then, hello from wherever in the world you are joining us. This is Gen xYZ. The revolution will be televised on Silenced Voices Propelling Change Through Creative Power and Social Media, of course, brought to you by Africa Soft Power in partnership with the Africa Center. Now, the point of this session is to take a deep dive into the gears driving the ingenious youth-led social movement against police brutality and bad governance. As he said earlier, my name is Seyitan Atigarin. I'm a news journalist for Rise News, and I've followed and reported on the protest since its inception, and I will be your moderator for the first half of this session, tagged Digital Canvas, How Technology is Shaping Modern Activism, hashtag ENDSARS, of course. And I'll be moving on very quickly to introduce our speakers for the day. Now, starting with Ebele Okobi, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Ebele is Facebook's Public Policy Director for Africa, the Middle East, and Turkey. Prior to joining Facebook, she was Global Head of Human Rights at Yahoo and a Mergers and Acquisitions Lawyer at Davis Polk and Wardwell in New York, Paris, and London. She is a life member of the Council of Foreign Relations, a board member of the Junior Achievement Africa, and a trustee of Care International UK, and a trustee of the Young Vic Center. Welcome, Ebele. All right, then. So Iyinoluwa Aboyeji is the general partner and co-founder of Future Africa, a platform that provides capital, coaching, and community for mission-driven innovators. He's also a co-founder of Andela, Africa's largest engineering organization. Previously, he was the CEO of Flutterwave, a business building payments technology and infrastructure to connect Africa to the global economy. While at Flutterwave, he led the company to become one of the fastest growing payment technology businesses of all time, processing over $2 billion across over 50 million transactions with annual revenues of millions of dollars a year. Welcome, Iyinoluwa. Now, moving on to our next panelist, Odunayo Eweniyi. Now, Odunayo is the co-founder and chief operating officer of PiggyVest, the first online savings and investment app in West Africa. In 2019, she was named SME Entrepreneur of the Year, West Africa by the Asian Bankers Wealth and Society, one of Forbes Africa's 30 under 30 in technology, one of 30 Quartz Africa innovators, and the youngest Nigerian on Forbes Africa list of 20 new wealth creators in Africa. Odunayo is committed to supporting the inclusion of women in technology. Welcome, Odunayo. Now, our last, well, of course, not the least panelist speaker today is Tomiwa Aladekomo. Tomiwa is the CEO of Big Cabal Media, a media platform building the next generation of African media brands and publishers of Tech Cabal and Zikoko. Now, prior to Big Cabal Media, he was the managing director at Ventra Media Group, a leading digital agency, media agency in Nigeria, focused on digital publishing, product development, content production, and monetization. He is a non-executive director of Chams PLC and was a 2013 fellow of the prestigious Archbishop Tutu Leadership Fellowship. Welcome, Tomiwa. Now, before we begin our conversation, I must say that we'll be taking questions much later. So please feel free to drop your questions as they will be fielded from the Africa Center's platforms, streaming, of course, on YouTube and Facebook. The hashtags are on Silenced Voices, hashtag ENDSARS, hashtag the Africa Soft Power Project, hashtag the Africa Center, hashtag my favorite, Sorosoke, hashtag Conscious Awakening, hashtag Creative Power, and finally, hashtag End Police Brutality. Please feel free to use one or all of the hashtags as you engage in these conversations on your various social media platforms. So now let's start. I'm going to kind of start with a warm-up question, if you would permit me. Now, it's a general question, so please feel free. If you just want to answer, you could just wave your hand and then you'll be allowed to speak. Now, I was on Tuesday, 20th of October, I was, well, I say fortunately or unfortunately, stationed at the Lekki toll gate. And when the army arrived, I had to flee for my life because they started shooting. So I just want to get a general sense of where you were when you heard about the shooting of unarmed ENDSARS protesters by some members of the Nigerian military. So if you can tell me where you were and how you felt in that moment as a Nigerian. I think I should start with ebele.
I mean, so I think I was furthest away. I live in London. And so for me, so first of all, knowing what was happening, I felt before that, I felt a couple of emotions. One, as a Nigerian, before the shooting started, I felt incredibly proud that people were taking to the streets and that people were talking about issues that, in my mind, are critically important. When I heard about the shooting started, there was, and many of you know that my personal story is that my brother, and obviously a Nigerian, was murdered by police in the US. And so there is a way in which that narrative is very much a narrative that's tied to race. And so seeing that this was something that my country was doing to my people, there is an added layer of betrayal. There's an added layer of how can this be, despite the fact that you've heard it before, but that would be something that was done in broad daylight, was something that for me was incredibly affecting. I have to just a sense of just very deep betrayal. It's one thing for it to be done in the US or in the UK, but for it to be done in a place that's meant to be home felt incredibly like the worst betrayal.
I completely understand how you feel. If I can just call Odunayo in, who of course is one of the founders of the Feminist Coalition. I'm going to come to that theme very soon. Odunayo, when you heard about the shootings at the Lekki toll gates, where were you and how did that make you feel as a Nigerian woman?
I was at home, and I think the feeling is still one of disbelief. I still cannot believe that happened. I still cannot believe that young people who were fighting for the right to survive were still shot in the middle of that fight to survive. So I was at home, I was with my sister. And I can just remember freezing when I saw the video, the first video that had the gunshots in it. I don't think I have still processed that. And I think it will be a while before the disbelief goes away that that happened. And I just hope that we all never forget.
All right, then thank you. Iyinoluwa, if I can just pull you into this conversation, where were you and how did you feel as a Nigerian when you heard about the shootings?
Hello, everyone. Thanks for inviting me on here. I think for me it was particularly hard because I was in that moment back channeling with someone in the presidency who had confirmed that the curfew was moved to 9 p.m. and that the people there would be safe. And literally my wife came into the room saying they're shooting people. And, you know, I think I had to cut off at that point and call someone on the field. And essentially, the last word he said was, make sure they don't carry the dead bodies away, which was kind of ironic. But yeah, that was, it was the height of betrayal. And, you know, the country has betrayed me many times, but I think for those, you know, first couple minutes of watching it, was literally, I felt like a bridge being burned. But yeah, that was how I felt.
What about you, Tomiwa?
So I was at home and just sort of like pulling my head out of a long day of work. And it was, my wife came and pulled me and I kind of had this disbelief, which I think like Odun, I still kind of have till today. And having grown up in Nigeria during the military era, it was an unpleasant throwback to a time that I kind of hoped we'd left behind. And wildly distressing. And my sisters had been at that toll gate every day of the protests, giving food to sort of cooking and, you know, arranging food. So the first thing was to check on them and make sure that they'd actually left, and that they had, but they had friends there. And so they were in this kind of panicked moment, thinking about going there, trying to give supports to their friends, trying to figure out, well, of course, like terrified and hiding and calling them from there. So it is kind of a really, really unpleasant, it was and is an unpleasant throwback to a time that I'd hoped we'd left behind, and an indication that the people that we have in government haven't really learned anything else about how to govern. You know, they still just, violence and force are still their first answers. And dialogue appears to be beyond them, you know, sort of a productive, meaningful dialogue, which it felt like we'd started to have. But yeah, I think that's where I was. That was my initial reaction, and those are kind of my initial thoughts about that.
Okay, I mean, at this point, it is important to note, because this session is largely focused on social media. Even though everybody was at home, we need to know that everybody on this panel was definitely working in the background. I mean, we have someone from FEMCO here, someone on Facebook, and people that have worked with this tech company. It's just very important to note that. Now, my first question is to Ebele. Now, as Nigerian security forces gunned down protesters on October 20th during the ENDSARS rallies, of course, to end police brutality, social media posts actively sharing the news on Facebook and Instagram were falsely flagged as fake news. Now, Nigerian Facebook and Instagram users who tried sharing pictures and videos of the killings at the Lekki toll gates got this response: fact checkers say this post contains false information. Now, we know that Facebook works with independent third parties to review and rate the accuracy of stories. In Nigeria, for example, it's been outsourced to Africa Check, AFP Hub, and Dubawa. But 2 days after, Instagram Communication issued an apology for incorrectly flagging content in support of the ENDSARS protest and marking posts as false. However, a request for comments by globalvoices.org, they sent a direct message to the verified Twitter handle of Andy Stone, who is the Facebook's policy communications director, and he did not acknowledge or reply this message. But my question to you is, what is Facebook doing to prevent this from happening again? How can Facebook be held accountable to the people? And does this situation give further credence to the arguments that large technology companies like Facebook and Instagram need to be regulated? It's like a 3-in-1, but yeah.
Yes, I think those are all really important questions. And that's exactly one of the things I think it's critical that I'm here to answer. So first of all, just to be clear, as a Nigerian, seeing the way that our company was inadvertently in the way of people raising their voices is something that will forever be a deep regret. It's something I'm deeply sorry for, and the company's very sorry for. I think what's really helpful is to understand why it happened, what we're doing to keep it from happening again. And I think the big piece of this is that there's some humility that must attach to any company or any organization that that has the responsibility of carrying voice. So just to give like a quick overview of what happened. So what happened is there were errors in our system where there was a post that mentioned, I know you guys remember the SARS virus. So there was a post that mentioned the SARS virus that had an image. That was correctly, so I just want to make sure, because our third party fact checkers, this had nothing to do with them. They correctly identified a post that mentioned the SARS virus. They debunked it. On the technical end, so that particular thing was labeled false. On the technical end, what happened is that got associated, or an image from it got associated with an image that was used for the ENDSARS protest. So what that meant is that once that image was associated, it got labeled as false. So this was a technical error. It was not a human error. So it was not an error that was made by our third-party fact checkers. So what happens is, in order, and again, I think this speaks to whenever we're thinking about solutions to address things like misinformation, for us to be thinking as a company, also as a community, about the way it can go wrong. So what we created, what we built into the system is whenever we identify images or things that are misinformation, we want to get to it as quickly as possible. So once it's marked false by a third-party fact checker, we use technology to fan out and to find duplicates of that. So that way, if someone sees an exact match of that debunked post, there's also a warning label on it that says, look, this post has been debunked. In this situation, there was a post with a doctored image, again, about the SARS virus that was debunked. The original false image was matched as debunked. A technical error occurred where they were then incorrectly matched to a different image, and then that started to be labeled as debunked. So this created a chain of fan outs across the platform that incorrectly matched identical images to the non-debunked images as misinformation. So we corrected this, but this is what happened, and this is the cause of the issue. So since then, there are a number of, as you can imagine, there are tons of conversations going on in Facebook, and I will say this is one of the benefits, the huge benefits of having a diverse, and by diverse, a population of employees that is representative. So you have me, you have Ime, you have a number of us, you have Emeka, you have multiple Emekas, you have a number of us within the company whose role it is to identify issues like this, who are flagging it, who are talking to our team saying this needs to be fixed, who are escalating it. So there are a couple of things that we are doing differently as a result. So one, we are paying very close attention to how our policies are being enforced on content that's related to ENDSARS protests. So we're paying specific and special attention to content that might be harmful, like outing, like graphic violence and hate speech. We're also encouraging people and partners on the ground to report content to us. We're also looking at trends around specific phrases. The other thing we're doing is, in the day after we addressed and fixed this issue, we launched a trending event specifically for the protest. So that meant that content in the queues that included specific keyword matches would be tagged with Nigeria protests, and we would put it in a dedicated filtered view for fact check. So it would be subject to heightened review and to review that takes into consideration the sensitivity. So we have a number of different keywords, including ENDSARS, including Lekki, including Tollgate, and we continue to edit this keyword set as we get more information and more feedback from our partners. We are also limiting fan out, so we won't permit the fanning out of labeled content for posts with multiple pieces of content. So where you have text, you have image in multiple pieces. What we're doing is we're not allowing the automatic deletion or fanning out or marking unless we've checked every single piece of content. So this shouldn't have happened on this occasion, but because our systems looked at the first image and what was sent and started fanning out, this is why the problem happened. So we're also putting in place systems to identify mistaken fan outs more quickly. There was still a time lag between when we identify the error and when we're able to fix it. And so we took too long to notice it, we took too long to check it, and we took too long to correct it. Those are some of the things that we're putting in place. We know we can do more, and we're continuing to work with our partners. We're continuing to work with our internal teams, and also getting recommendations from people externally. To the question about regulation, I have to say, and I'm not the only person who said, our CEO has said it as well, we actually welcome regulation. It's clear that as a company, no company should be in charge of creating what policies are for a platform, for technology, for a sector that is dependent upon by so many. Having said that, I think it's really, really important, and if we're talking about Nigeria as well, to have educated and informed government who are interested in regulation that is for the good of people, not for the good of necessarily keeping power in place, not necessarily for the good of protecting bad actors, but really creating a political or legislative ecosystem that really puts people at the heart of it. So absolutely, yes, I agree that there should be more regulation, but we double down on saying that regulation should be informed and should have at its heart human rights.
Of course. Okay, thank you so much, Ebele. I want to move over very quickly to Tomiwa. Now, still on the topic of fake news, as many protesters began to share video evidence and photos online, we had government sources and of course, even Facebook dismissing them as fake. Now, in response to this, we had protesters and other citizens begin to adopt technology solutions to counter these government sources. Now, two of the biggest trends that began to emerge after this was automatic geotagging, that would, as well as manual timestamping. Now, geotagging, very quickly, for people that don't understand, is a process where geographical metadata is added to a media file in order to help identify the geographical location where the file was created. Now, in a country like Nigeria that has had issues with documenting and keeping records to begin with so many important occurrences in the nation's history not being documented or preserved, how else can we, one, curb fake news and make it that people can go back to be educated about pieces of history that really interest them? So this is for you, Tomiwa.
Thank you, Seyitan. I think curbing fake news is a really difficult challenge, and I'm not sure it's actually possible. We've kind of let the genie out of the bottle in terms of giving everybody the tools to create content and to distribute it to really wide reach. And I think the social media platforms kind of have really amplified that capacity in terms of everybody has a voice. And I think there's really good things about that, because you're no longer subject to the tyranny of sort of 3 newspapers, which might all be owned by the government, dictating what it is that you see as reality. But it, of course, has sort of the hugely negative sort of effects where you see sort of information that's false get proliferated very, very quickly. Now, a couple of things about sort of this specific information and disinformation that came out around that issue, along with all of that. I mean, Cabal covered this and wrote quite a bit about it at the time, along with sort of inadvertent disinformation or misinformation. That's people sharing things that they think are correct, but are actually false, or things that they just haven't fact checked. Some of that happened, and it was a really emotional and heightened emotional period. So of course, people are sharing sort of like the worst content without really, their sort of filters aren't up. And so there was a lot of that. My suspicion and sort of the sense that we get is that the Nigerian army was also announced the cyber warfare initiative a few days before this happened, actually a couple of days before this happened. And there was a fair amount of deliberate disinformation put out into the public sphere as well. So it's one thing to ask people to be wary of fake news and to think before they share, and to give them all the education around sort of how to judge what is fake news and what isn't. And I think that's a really important step, is We have to continue to train people to be more media literate. We have to continue to train people to be more careful and more aware about what it is they share and how it is they share it, making sure that things actually are fact-checked, or what it is that they are, what it is that they say that they are before they share. Of course, noting that fact checks can go wrong, as they did in this particular case. But that's one element. But then you have deliberate disinformation. And whatever it is that the government says about the dangers of social media, the truth of the matter is that they came and engaged in the social media space. And this is definitely without doubt, is that they had influencers, they had speakers, all people sowing doubt on things that we have live video of. And whatever is possible, it's highly unlikely that there was live video from the scene of an anticipated event that was faked, you know, that hundreds of people experienced the same thing and all decided to fake it, that videos that came from multiple angles, that captured events from multiple perspectives were all faked. And so there's some things I think that are sort of like beyond the pale and beyond the imagination. And it's fairly clear that the government, you know, contributed to the atmosphere of chaos and the disinformation and the lack of clarity around what has happened. I mean, till today, there's been no sort of, you know, they haven't claimed it, they haven't owned it. And so all of that is sort of a fairly deliberate attempt to keep things cloudy. But on the issue of fake news, I don't think we can let the genie, we can put the genie back in the bottle. So we do have to live with the fact that there will be more people creating news for whatever reason that is inaccurate and sending out content that is inaccurate, whether deliberately or otherwise. I think the platforms bear a huge, huge responsibility. I know they do a lot of work, but there's a lot more work for them to do, frankly. That's your Facebook, that's your Twitter, that's YouTube, all of them. And they bear a huge, huge responsibility for limiting the spread of fake news, for continuing to improve the technologies to identify what is and what isn't fake news, to be more reliable and trustworthy from a fact-checking perspective, and avoiding the kind of technical glitches that we had this time. But on the public side, there's a responsibility to get more and more informed, to get more and more media literate. And you'll find that, you know, there are young people today who have an incredible facility for looking at something and being able to sort of parse it immediately, do a reverse image search to like tell that this image actually came from last year, and so it doesn't have anything to do with the current protests, to be able to check the metadata and see that actually this thing says it happened in Lagos, but it's actually a picture from Namibia, or whatever it is. So I think we have to get more media literate. We have to educate the public to be more media literate, but the technology platforms have a lot of work to do to sort of restrict the reach of sort of this false news or fake information, and keep things and keep that stuff from being over amplified.
Okay, so I know I'm directing questions to each and every one of you, but please, if one of the speakers says something that sparks your attention, or sorry, picks your attention, just let me know. I can, you know, just make sure that you can have a conversation. Remember, it's a back and forth. It's not an interview. I'm trying to make it as conversational as possible. Now, moving forward, Iyinoluwa, my next question is for you. At the beginning of the protest, organizations like the ENDSARS response team, the Feminist Coalition, and others accepted donations employing the traditional route of bank transfers, of course. But as the protest dragged on, the donations became a bit more centralized, with FEMCO accepting donations via the online platform Flutterwave. But with alleged interference from the government, the protesters quickly adopted cryptocurrency donations. Now, can you walk us through that experience, and also tell us what do these new technologies mean for banks going forward? How do you reckon cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin sustain or would be able to revolutionize the way protests are crowd-funded?
That's a great question. I just want to start with some disclaimers. I'm no longer in the management of Flutterwave. So I can't necessarily comment about whatever may or may not have happened with respect to donations being collected. But I can tell you that when we began Flutterwave, we did imagine a time like this, and we're very proud that it's being used for such civic action. So we're extremely proud that Flutterwave has become a rallying point for both young people protesting police brutality, as well as the government, who is also raising money for businesses that were unfortunately affected by the looting and violence by sponsored thugs. It's been a rallying point for people on both sides of this crisis. And I think that's exactly what infrastructure and utility like Flutterwave was designed to do, to be a rallying point for people to be able to contribute financially and to be able to accept payments in order to further a greater future for Africa. Now, with respect to Bitcoin, I must say I am a big fan. I've been on a journey when it comes to Bitcoin for a number of years, and thanks to the work of people like Timi Ajiboye, educating those of us who are kind of late to the party, and people like Jack Dorsey as well, educating those of us who've been late to the party. I've become a big believer in Bitcoin, primarily because of its ability to provide privacy as well as some level of fidelity to the collection and disbursement of funds. And this played a huge role with the protests. I think I noticed from the numbers that they were able to accept, I think, 9 Bitcoins, which is a lot compared to all the other forms of funding that they had. So it's a real clear trend that we're moving into a very decentralized finance ecosystem and infrastructure, and a real sign to people like myself who founded what I would now call kind of the old school payments platforms, that the ground has shifted and that the future is basically here. So I think it was a huge proof point about what's coming next, and perhaps more of us can show it. I'll tell you, for me personally, I made my first donation in Bitcoin because of the Femco's Bitcoin account. So I guess it made me a believer. And I don't think I'm going to stop. So yeah, that's my response.
I mean, you did make reference to the fact that Flutterwave, that payment platform, is now old school. So we would refer to the banks, doing transfers as well, Asian school.
Those guys belong in museums.
I want to come in there because when we look at what these technologies mean for banks going forward, we do have a large population in Nigeria and even outside Nigeria who are still kind of lagging behind, not understanding how to. I don't know how to use Bitcoin. I'm still, Flutterwave is kind of where it stops it for me. So I don't know if we can just come in here, like moving forward, what does this mean for banks?
I don't know what it means for banks. I can speak to what it means for fintech companies, though. Okay. And I think maybe banks can extrapolate lessons from there. For fintech companies, it means that people will be moving away from fiat. Fiat is normal currency, and moving into more like decentralized currencies like Bitcoin, like Ethereum, like Litecoin. When we realized that we could no longer receive donations in Naira, our friends kind of like who already run cryptocurrency companies were just like, oh yeah, no, give us like 10 minutes. And there was a Bitcoin address that was generated in 10 minutes. And then Jack tweeted it, and then, the story continued from there without like any interruptions. And it did help a lot of people realize that Bitcoin is simpler than they think. So now I can speak to my company personally that we're going to get a way for people to save and invest in Bitcoin. Right.
Very quickly, when you say we, if you can just clarify, we being who?
I mean, my company, PiggyVest. PiggyVest is a fintech company here in Nigeria, and we've largely operated in Naira and dollar. But now, even though the use of Bitcoin had always been apparent, I suppose the events of the past couple of weeks kind of brought it home and put it in perspective, just how useful it can be even in the day-to-day. So for fintech companies, it's become like absolutely imperative. And perhaps for banks, as they move into their holdco structure, maybe this is something they can consider. I don't know.
All right, then. Thank you, Odunayo. Now, he had mentioned, FEMCO earlier, and, talking about the Feminist Coalition, who I think 2 days ago was even applauded by Beyonce, which is a big deal because she tends to not, comment about certain things. Now, FEMCO, an all-woman group, who technically, was the financial backbone of the ENDSARS protest, doing so with transparency and accountability. Now, as someone who is committed to supporting the inclusion of women in technology, can you talk to me more about the importance of having more women in technology, considering the role that they played in this movement, and also in other parts of the world, like even in how women handled COVID-19, of course, the pandemic that we're still dealing with in the world. We have examples of, the New Zealand's 39-year-old Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, and from Taiwan's president. She was, they were very, very on ground and seemed to have handled this very well. So what would you say to that? How important is it to involve women?
Well, I mean, I think it's like perhaps the most important thing to involve women. As a woman in technology myself, there is no downside to having more women. FEMCO is an all-women group because we realized that for a long time, people are fighting for the equality of women, but we haven't really consolidated at what point, like, is it like, are women being excluded? And we identified that it was from the angles of money and power, right? When you drill down at the core of all the problems that we experience, at the core of all the exclusion and oppression that women have experienced, you come down to those two things. And this was our first project, and it validated everything that we had thought. We said, let's help with this, and then transparency, accountability, all relating to money, became something that propelled the organization to almost the center of the protest. So for me, I hope that this serves as a lesson and kind of as a path forward to allowing women take more leadership positions. We do make up almost 52% of the world's population, and I think that that kind of representation across board at every level, it's something that's very necessary. In technology, women-led companies are arguably performing better. In banking, you can tell, like, in different sectors, you just can when there's like the hand of someone who's used to multitasking, who's used to being asked to go the extra mile. No one asked us to be accountable for all the funds, but we knew that we had to, because people somehow make women work extra hard, right? So if you look at that and apply it across all the sectors, you realize that there cannot possibly be a downside to including women. So I hope that whatever we've done here in just those 2 weeks and the tiny things that we've achieved in the past 2 weeks serve as a way to help more women be propelled to the leadership positions and to the forefront of these things, because we do have a lot to say and do.
Definitely. I was at the Lekki toll gates when the protests were going on, and I can speak to the coordination as well as how happy people were to be there. I spoke to one of the I say less privileged people that had come in from different parts of Nigeria, and they were so amazed that this was something that was put together in just a few days. People that were coming there and eating 3 square meals with fruits, desserts, and all that. So definitely, I have to say that FEMCO have been real game changers. Now, I want to bring Ebele back into this conversation, right? Now, a businessman by the name of Mr. Adamu Garba instituted a $1 billion lawsuit against the CEO and founder of Twitter international company, Jack Dorsey, at the Federal High Court in Abuja here in Nigeria over the alleged sponsorship of the ongoing ENDSARS protests across the country. Now, he urged the courts to direct Mr. Dorsey to stop the operation of Twitter in any part of Nigeria, and also joined respondents, the Attorney General of the Federation. He put on there the National Security Advisor, the IG of Police, the Director General of the Department of State of Service. I mean, a lot of people were on there. Now, as of today, the News Agency of Nigeria reports that the case has not been assigned to a judge. But as someone that works with a social media company, how going forward, how can people protect themselves from this kind of lawsuits? I mean, because you're trying to do something right as a company and then you're being sued for it. What do you think about this, Ebele?
I mean, I couldn't begin to comment on the lawsuit, but can I go back really quickly to the conversation?
Of course.
Only because I just very quickly, I know it's not necessarily about tech, but we as a culture, as a community, have a long history of women taking care, of women being in charge. I mean, often when those women aren't in front, and often when the story is written about, the event, often our mother's names or grandmother's names are not in there. But I just wanted, but women running stuff is not new. I mean, about market women's revolt, that's part of Nigeria's history. That it's not new. So that's what and then also, if you look at Black Lives Matter, the impetus of that was also women. So I just want to be clear that the work that Femco is doing is in the long line of women's leadership, and something that I personally admire deeply. In terms of, so I couldn't begin to speak to Twitter's lawsuit, but I will say that I think what we're looking for as a company, as any company, is you're looking for some amount of predictability, rule of law within an environment. And so to the extent that a country offers that, and I have to be honest, I have to say that thus far, and that is why we as a company are investing in Nigeria, it's not a mistake that we're opening, that we plan to open an office in Nigeria, and that the office is focused on tech. So a lot of times we open office, the office will be focused on sales for Nigeria, because we know the extent to which there is tech talent in Nigeria. In Nigeria, we're doubling down on innovation, and we're doubling down on the notion of Africans as creators, not just consumers of technology. So yeah, so of course, so I can say that as a company, we absolutely want to continue to invest in Nigeria. And if investment requires, or what you're looking for is some sort of predictability in the policy environment, rule of law, in the sense that that there will be fairness.
Of course. I just want to very quickly let our viewers know that we'll be taking questions from you very soon. So I would greatly appreciate it if you could submit your questions to the Facebook and YouTube pages of the African Center. Thank you very much. Now, this question is kind of directed to everybody, and you can just feel free to jump in, because it's something that has been trending and it is still continuing to trend, which is the anti-social media bill. Now, if you've not heard about it before, in Nigeria, the anti-social media bill was introduced by the Senate of the Federal Republic on November 5th, 2019. Now, the intent of this bill is to criminalize the use of social media in peddling false or malicious information. Now, in recent times, the upper legislative arm seems determined to pass the bill despite the immense rejection by majority of Nigerians, especially after seeing how much power they had on social media. Now, in what ways do you think that bill will change the tech landscape if it does, if it's passed in the upper legislative? And what are your views in general on social media regulations? Just make it fun. If you want to answer, just wave your hand, and then we can. Who wants to jump on that question?
Let me jump in.
All right then.
I mean, again, this is one of those trying to put the genie back in the bottle things. And I think it's extremely unlikely that that bill passes, because there's a great deal of resistance to it in the polity. And I think anybody who does vote for it will get punished pretty aggressively by voters and by the public in the next elections. I think youth voices have gotten a lot louder over the last few weeks, and will continue to stay that loud in a number of ways, which will probably impose some accountability that is frequently lacking from the Nigerian political space on our famously sort of inflexible politicians. Let's use a polite word. But I think it is attempting to stuff the genie back in the bottle, in that, you know, it's kind of a repressive and a regressive approach to the world. So let's suppress all the conversation. Let's keep people from talking instead of having a conversation with them. Let's go back to the world before, because that will somehow solve the problems. And I mean, it's interesting when you hear Nigerian politicians talk about China and Saudi Arabia as sort of like their examples of the society that we should be building. And it is one of those things that makes you think, what is the vision that Nigerians have for themselves and for the country that they want to live in, and who's asked to them and who's engaging with them. Because you can see from the rejection of the bill that no one's interested in, taking this away. Like, we're trying to, and I mean, it's so interesting because of the way it dovetails with these protests. It's like you've got a population that is over 50%, below the age of 45, trying to move forward into the world. And you've got this tiny leadership of people who are stuck in the 70s and 80s at best, trying to move you back into a different time. And so it's that disconnect between the leadership of the country and the reality of people on the ground. And I think it's why, we need to have these loud voices. We need to continue to engage in the political process, not continue. We need to engage a lot more robustly in the political process. We need to keep sort of the pressure in the conversation on politicians and not let the energy die down of these protests. And I don't think, you can't protest indefinitely. You do need to move from protest to sort of, actual lawmaking, to actual political action, to pressure groups that, can last over time. And so I'd say that's probably the biggest thing. That's the most important thing. But the likelihood that this passes, I think, is extremely narrow, because really, 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 the size of the population, I mean, you might have seen a certain lawmaker, saying ridiculous things about it and then crying on TV a few days later. And I think, there's a bit of fear of, there's a fear of the populace. And I think a healthy fear of the populace is a good thing for governments to have. And I think, we've given them a bit of that now, and we need to kind of keep it up and keep it going.
Okay. All right. Yes, Ebele.
I think what Tomiwa said about the vision of what we want or what people want, I think is a really important thing for a number of reasons. One, I think often lawmakers, when they're thinking about legislation, they're thinking about what do we want to prevent. But policymaking is about creating the world, is creating possible, like what do you want to enable? And so having lawmakers think, well, actually, what is the world I want? And how do I create a policy environment that enables that? And then even with these protests, I think right now, obviously, is the time to say, no, this is what we don't want. What I would encourage all of us to be thinking robustly about what is it that we do want. So there's a time for protesting, and then there's a time for how is it that we can actually be part of what's new. I think there's a tendency in conversations in Nigeria and amongst Nigerians to talk about politicians as people over there, as corrupt old people that have nothing to do with us. There's a moment where we need to be part of it. So yes, you need the give and take. You need people who are protesting, but who will be part of it? Who will, if someone's not proactively and robustly saying, not only this is what we don't want, but saying this is what we do want, and we are shaping what we do want, more of these people who are in the streets should be the people who are in the State House. More of the people in the streets are people who should be governors. And so the extent to, and it's funny because there can be like, oh, I don't want to be that person. But if we say that all politicians are rogues, then the only politician we'll get will be rogues. And so I do think there's a huge opportunity now to step into what's possible, and for people in the streets to be the people making the decisions as opposed to protesting the decisions.
I mean, there was something Tomiwa said, and it's very important to note that even though the ENDSARS protest started as trying to end police brutality, as time went on, it's evolved to, like a push to end bad governance. And even in the North, it started to push to end insecurity. I mean, we know, in case you don't know, like in the North, in Nigeria, there's a huge, Boko Haram is very, very much present. And Boko Haram is a terrorist group that has terrorized the North for such a long time. And now if we bring it back to what social media and technology does, generally in Nigeria, many parts of Africa and across the world, majority of technology and social media platform users are the upper middle and upper class. Now, how can we use the platforms to drive sustainability if they are not being used by a large segment of the population? How can technology be used to bridge the internal gaps in the country with respect to separation of experiences and facilitating a greater dialogue between social classes participating in social political movements? And I'm going to throw that to Odunayo and Iyinoluwa because you're the tech guys here.
So for me, I think that from what I saw this past couple of weeks, I think that we might be underestimating just how much people have actually adopted technology in Nigeria. And we also need to stop looking at it from the perspective of Twitter and Facebook and really factor WhatsApp into the conversation. A lot of the conversation that drove how people reacted to the protests, how people reacted to the news and just subsequent events actually came from WhatsApp and all the other messaging apps. And like just the fact that like there's a lot more feature phones out there, everyone essentially now has a phone. Everyone has a smartphone. It's cheap to get the smartphone now. We're not where we need to be with the whole technology thing, but I don't think that the entire movement would have been possible if there wasn't a convergence of generations, across generations, on social media and on messaging apps. So obviously, I would definitely advocate for higher and more technology penetration in the country. We definitely need more people on the internet. We need more people joining voices because we are definitely powerful when we speak with one voice, but also give credit to the fact that older people are just beginning to see the value of these apps that they previously eschewed. So that's a good thing.
Iyinoluwa, I saw you smiling earlier. I feel like you wanted to say something. Please go ahead.
Sure. Well, I mean, I tend to look at these issues from two angles. One is an angle of opportunity, and the other is an angle of forestalling challenges. So I'll start with the forestalling challenges. You see, one repeated pattern with Nigeria and with the Nigerian government in particular is that it doesn't quite understand that whenever it responds forcefully to peaceful dialogue, it opens the door to a violent reaction from people who are justified in engaging violently because of the nature and the state of the country. And it's something that I've repeated many times to a lot of people in authority in Nigeria, from the presidency to the central bank, and try to explain to them that the reason why young people are having a conversation rather than picking up arms in response to some of their justifiable grievances is because of the influence of the quote unquote social media generation. So they've kind of normalized an approach to dealing with grievances that doesn't require people picking up guns or firebombing government installations, but more about conversation. And social media has been an outlet for that. Now, if the government decides that it wants to shut down social media particularly, or it wants to shut down the internet, then it has to be ready to deal with the consequences from a national security perspective. And those consequences will include armed conflict, which none of us want. So that's one point in terms of forestalling challenges. But also in terms of opportunities, I look on social media and I think particularly about how many jobs it has created since it began in Nigeria. There's immense amounts of commercial activity happening on Instagram. There's a lot of people who are being paid to manage profiles on Twitter. There's a lot of commercial activity happening on Facebook. And in actual fact, the vast majority of the population is gainfully engaged in this way. So when you say you want to shut down social media rather than expand the basis and enable more people access to social media so they have an avenue to improve their lives, there is another opportunity lost, but also another huge challenge to be forestalled, which is what do all these young people then do? Which increases the opportunities for armed conflict and which pushes us further into the dystopia that we're all trying to avoid, which quite frankly, as far as the population and demographics are concerned, it's a miracle that we are not there yet. So I think my own case when I have these conversations with authorities is basically, look, you take this away, be prepared for what happens next. And, you know, we saw a very small taste of it in the 2 days following the protests. And so I think a lot of people in government are very sober and are understanding of the fact that these numbers that we reel out, actually, when they come to life, it's very monstrous. And it can happen in a flash. And so I think that we should all just keep repeating those talking points, in my opinion, and keep engaging the government and people in authority to understand that what they're trying to do by shutting off social media is very much akin to throwing a lighted match in a room full of leaking gas. And none of us will be the better off for it. Definitely.
I agree. Actually, I agree with you on there. Does anyone wanted to just comment quickly before I go to the next question? Tomiwa, Iyinoluwa just spoke. Ebele. Okay, okay, Tomiwa, you go.
A bit related to what it is I said before. That question of where we're going really is like super critical. And I mean, and he's touched on this, which is there's just this huge population that's aching to move into the future. And you can't continuously drag them back. And I think that's just absolutely critical for everybody to keep in mind. And it endangers us as a society. You've got this young population that's looking for opportunities, that's looking for, you know, education, that's looking for ways to move forward. So, you know, if you're going to criminalize social media, where do you start? Where do you stop? You know, does that include YouTube, which is now one of the biggest sort of educational platforms for young people? WhatsApp. And I mean, I think the other thing is these things cut across generations as tools. So like your mom is using Facebook as much as, you know, like, you know, your younger siblings are using Facebook. And I think from a tech Cabal perspective, something that was really interesting when we talked about sort of the possibility of a shutdown of the internet during these protests was the way Nigeria's like technology architecture is built. These politicians are as dependent on these tools as we are. You know, it's like if you shut down sort of like Nigeria's internet, it's just, well, I mean, it's anarchy because we have come to rely on these technologies. People, you know, don't keep as much cash at home as they kept in the 90s because there is the presumption that there will be an ATM and they will be able to get cash out of it. If you shut down the internet, ATM stop working. You know, if you shut down the internet, we haven't built sort of like a private internet infrastructure, government infrastructure where the government is able to communicate with people in Lagos from Abuja securely and outside of the internet, which is the thing that, you know, like successful repressive regimes are able to do is to build infrastructure that allow themselves to actually like shut down these things without shutting down their own ability. So how's the president going to speak with the governor of Lagos if, you know, they shut down the internet? And so when you talk about shutting down social media, the truth of the matter is that these people's kids will kill them. So just forget like, you know, the people on the streets or whatever it is. Like, I mean, again, we saw
people asked was, who decides what is criminal? Because that's very important. If this is just a group of people in a room saying, oh, we don't like this, so therefore it's criminal, you know what I mean? And of course, you also mentioned the fact that, you know, these people rely on, you know, the internet infrastructure, but some people will argue with you and say they're still very stuck in the old ways. I mean, when Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu, who is the governor of Lagos State, wanted to present the 5 demands by the youth, he actually went all the way to Abuja to present it. And people didn't understand why he didn't just send an email. So, you know, in a way, they're kind of on it, but they might not fully understand it.
I mean, you know, they're not going to be Odu, like, you know, with the latest Bitcoin and sort of setting up the systems. They're not going to be that. But I mean, at the same time, you know, like, yeah, there's still a huge reliance on this stuff. That's the truth.
Every single one of them is on WhatsApp. Every single one. So yes, like exactly. There's not a single one who isn't. And so this notion that people aren't dependent, people are hugely dependent on internet technology. Even if they're carrying themselves from pillar to post to go present, they're using WhatsApp to call their children.
Yeah, I mean, I actually honestly don't even think they have the guts to do it. I mean, sorry, I hate to one should not threaten the Nigerian government with stupidity. But yeah, let's not. Yeah, okay. So let me not threaten them. But yeah, I don't know. I think their reliance is pretty extensive, and the number of people that rely on these things, and I mean the economic hit we would take. I mean, we did close the borders, so yes, we are capable of self-sabotage.
But can I see something? Can I say something, please?
Please.
I think people underestimate how close we were to shutting down the internet on the island.
Okay. Yes. Yeah.
I say this because and obviously, as you know, Tomiwa, it's a matter of national security. But the truth was, we were literally seconds away from the island being cut off from the internet. So I guess you walked yourself back. Do not threaten.
No.
They're very crazy people.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to point out was that while I completely understand how close they came to taking the nuclear option, I don't think that they themselves realize just how much the peace was owed to the internet working and the food being provided on protest grounds. And I think that's I think the inability to look at things as a comprehensive whole is part of what I think Nigeria's problem really is. Because all the people who were tweeting from home, if they didn't have the internet on the island, they would be outside, right? Had to keep a protest peaceful if everyone is outside. Had to keep a protest peaceful if people cannot get anything to eat. You can't keep hungry people peaceful. You can't keep hungry people not angry. And so I was just really still in disbelief, honestly, just about how away from this particular logic that everyone seemed to be, about how if you look at it from outside looking in on a comprehensive point of view, you shouldn't, all of the steps that were taken from October 19th to October 21st should just not have happened if we had people just kind of putting all the pieces together like that.
Okay. All right, then I want to talk about, the involvement of Generation X and, it was xYZ, right? Now, first off, we know that the ENDSARS movement in Nigeria had been was a profound display of ingenuity by youths who have crowdfunded the protest. They organized medical and legal support, food and social responsibility initiatives. However, if you look at it, they have not been properly celebrated by the international media for their efforts. If this protest were taking place in a different country, they would have been lauded probably more for their ingenuity. They're almost being painted as villains in certain ways. Now, a good example would be the depiction of the Hong Kong protesters' strategies. I mean, I felt like I was part of that and I was in a different country. So now, how can we challenge international media to address the issues of telling stories about the continent, not through a racial lens, and also not ignoring the efforts of young, brilliant activists like yourselves on the continent?
Let me speak as a member of the media. We do our work. Let's do our work. I think,
yes.
Amen, and kudos to Arise. You guys did amazing. Clap. That was a moment for Arise. Cabal and Zikoko, for 2 weeks we shut down all of our regular coverage. I mean, Zikoko is memes and funny and listicles and stories about young people's lives. For 2 weeks, we covered nothing but the protests. And we took it from every angle. We published a list of protest locations every day. We showcased people who did amazing work. We showcased the sad stories, the great stories. We did the work. Cabal covered this thing from a technology angle, left, right, and center. Their pieces, we got picked up by the international media a number of times because there were angles that we were covering that, nobody else was covering. So and this is something that I've heard E talk about. It's look, before you go ask for respect, before you go ask for anybody to give you anything, do the work. And so I think to those who did the work, and I don't think, from a television perspective, the BBC gave us some time, the CNN gave us some time, but there's not going to be an archive of coverage of ENDSARS that compares with what Arise has, period. It's just like nobody did a more robust job of interviewing players, people to give context to it, and that matters. So like, let them follow us. You want to have a conversation, come and call. I will give you the managing editor of Tech Cabal or like writers at Tech Cabal to give you context on what it is that happened and how it happened and why. Let us do the work. You want images? There were brilliant Nigerian photographers on ground doing the coverage day in, day out. We made that, like the kids on the street, the young people on the street, the people of Nigeria made those protests blow up. The international community keyed in, the diaspora was amazing, but they followed the lead of the people who were on ground. And I think that's super important and super critical in everything it is that we do. Is like, we set the agenda, let them follow. And I think that's really critical.
I would push back a little bit, because if we looked at our platforms, and we haven't released these, but if we looked at our platforms, ENDSARS was trending higher by multiples, like by 5 times than Trump, then election, then Biden, then all of these sort of global terms. The conversation, every single Black entertainer, it was as if Nigeria is the country for every Black. So from Beyonce, every single person was talking about this. And I thought it was beautiful because the conversation, to Tomiwa's point, was being led by Nigerians. So it wasn't an outside in, what's going on in the united country. It was people who were actually very informed. And that is the way, in my view, it should go on forever. So it shouldn't be people coming in and making up a story. It was Nigerians telling that story. It was Nigerians driving that story. It was Nigerians speaking directly to influencers. I actually thought that the stories about it, what came out of this, I'd say our conversation we're having internally at Facebook is introducing our senior people, meet Nigeria, because it was such a shock to some people to see, wait a minute, look at all of these people talking about Nigeria. Look at all these people talking about the work that Odunayo is doing. Like, people who had never heard of Odunayo are now talking about Odunayo forever. So I actually think that the power of the diaspora and the power of Nigeria, despite the pain behind it, was made incredibly clear through this event.
Yep.
Right. I want to take a quick question from an audience member on YouTube, and this person is asking how they can help. I'm trying to understand if it's like on an international platform, but that's all they've sent in. What's the best way they can help? And also, to everyone, what do you feel should be the next step, and how can we sustain the movement and keep it focused on real change? Because we don't want to just continue to have conversations. How do we change those conversations and change it to action? So let's start with Odunayo. I can see she's already about to answer.
No, I was going to speak to Ebele's point about like the international community joining in, and I thought that was really great. But I want to say that before they joined in, and like I'm 100% with Tomiwa here, is that the impression on ENDSARS on Twitter had to get to about 38 million by Nigerians, for Nigerians, before we got any attention from outside. And I think that for international awards, I don't think that that's particularly like important, right? We still haven't like won what we're fighting for, and so I think it's early. And honestly, the attention was great, like in making some things like happen and some things not happen. But I think that the focus right now is understandably on how Nigerians were able to use their voices and be so loud that the silence of the international community was seen as complicity. And I think that's a great thing. And then for helping, whoever's asking how they can help, I think there's still some credible organizations who are helping medically, who are helping legal, and who are helping the victims of this the past couple of weeks and before. So you can donate. And also, I think that on social media, continue to use your voice. As long as we have it, just continue to use your voice there. And, you know, October 20th kind of put a damper on like everything and everyone, but this continues because there has unarguably been an awakening. There's young people who didn't care about like politics or political infrastructure now being awake to a lot of the things that we've previously ignored. So that's like a good way to channel all of this energy, is figuring out what does the Nigeria, like Ebele said, what is the goal that we want for Nigeria and how can we push for it? How can we get there?
Right, does anybody want to jump in on that point? Like moving forward, what are the next?
Yeah. So I think from my perspective, it's going to be very important for us to come to a global consensus around what is going on in Nigeria from the perspective of what the ENDSARS movement has exposed about the nature of the Nigerian state and what it must be held to account on. Its politicians, its official government, its statesmen and those who are not so stately. And most importantly, the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, General Muhammadu Buhari. And that is that we have to come to an understanding as a matter of urgency that every Nigerian life is precious and that it deserves to be defended, and that in the event that the sacredness of Nigerian life is by any means breached, there has to be a response for justice. And I think that as we have that conversation, we can broaden this topic to include a lot of other injustices that are still ongoing today, including what's going on in the north, including what's going on right now in Oyigbo, in Rivers State, including what's going on in many states where there's banditry and kidnapping. And most importantly, it has to come back to this place of consequence. Till today, we have 37 police officers that have been indicted by the presidential panel on SARS. None of these men have seen the book. Many of them have been promoted within the police force to places of high honor, which in many ways is a message that is being sent not just to Nigerians, but to the international community about the impunity that is being tolerated by the government. And so I think the next step would be our friends in diaspora need to be very loud about that and to insist on a re-architecture of the Nigerian security architecture, basically. And particularly to insist that all the service chiefs go, and to insist that the IGP of police goes, and that the 37 men who have been accused of killing Nigerians by the presidential panel are immediately dismissed. So I think in terms of where we go from here, until those three things happen, the reality is, unfortunately, what ENDSARS has just done is justify the brutality of the Nigerian state. And just as we are seeing that message, men of the security forces in Nigeria are also seeing that message. And so what would most likely happen is, rather than see a decrease in incidents as a result of these justifiable agitation, we are going to actually see an increase, because people in the security forces will now believe that they are justified in acting with impunity and getting away with it. Okay. So that for me is the most important thing.
Okay, thank you so much, A. I mean, I would like us to wrap on a global perspective, but before, I actually want to call Tomiwa out a bit. Yes. Now, there has been growing demands that the Judicial Panel of Inquiry set up by the Nigerian government be streamed live to ensure accountability. Now, we know that the protests were, I mean, it was definitely a huge boost. I mean, Odunayo just said it, 38 million impressions. That's a big deal. But it almost looks as if as soon as the protests were over, things, Nigerians just kind of forgot that, okay, there's there's a panel that has been set up to look into the Lekki tollgate shootings, as well as restitution for the SARS victims. But I can say today that only traditional media is there. As of when I was there on Saturday, it was just Arise TV, the BBC, and Channels Television. There was I didn't notice any online, any of this online or social media platforms who were covering the protests. So Tomiwa, why was the Coco not there at the Judicial Panel of Inquiry?
Because we don't have Arise's resources. Like, and that's the start and end of the answer to that question. No, seriously. So we've covered it. We're giving it coverage. We definitely don't have the resources to have somebody on ground every single day of the panels. We have had, we have been doing coverage of it. And if you go to our website, you'll see that we have a new sort of section of Zikoko called Citizen, where we're a lot more focused on sort of like the relationship between the citizen and the government, and covering this. But yeah, strictly from a resource perspective, it is quite difficult for us to sort of like have that kind of long-term on-ground perspective. I will say, to back up E's point a little bit, I mean, look, post-protest, hundreds of people were rounded up by the Nigerian police. They've been arraigned, transferred from prison to prison, whether innocent or like sort of wrapped up in sort of other people's things. It's none of that was us. Like none of that required a panel. None of that required like the setting up of this grand panel to sort of like prosecute this guy that, I mean, I have a friend whose driver is still missing. And they heard he was in Kirikiri, now he's in Makoko. It really shouldn't take nationwide protests for the Nigerian government to do the right thing, for people who have already been identified and accused of specific crimes to have their day in court. So the truth of the matter is that even these panels are the government passing its responsibility onto the citizens. You leave your job and come and sit on a panel to investigate a crime where if you committed that crime, we'd have you in jail in 15 minutes. We'd have you arraigned, we'd have you sort of like disappear into the belly of the beast. But no, we have to leave our lives and go and be part of these panels. And that was some of the difficulties, like people trying to figure out like, well, like, okay, why is it that it requires so much?
I have to here. Sorry, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I just want to come in as we have just 5 minutes to wrap up, and I want everybody to just take like a minute to probably answer this last question. We need, I want to ask you lessons for the world to learn how, because I mean, we do know that police brutality happens everywhere. We did see what happened with George Floyd as well, Black Lives Matter in the US, and then down to ENDSARS. So my final question to you is, on a global perspective, what does this mean for Black voices in positioning, organizing, impact? What can the largest nation teach the world about how to enable protest and change via technology? So let's just do 1 minute each so that everybody can have time to talk. Starting with ebele.
I'm gonna be fast. The one thing I'll say is that we can amplify each other's voices, that there's power in the diaspora, and that if an injury to one is an injury to all. So the same way people took to the streets for Black Lives Matter in Lagos, people in DC should take to the streets to end SARS. So solidarity is everything.
All right, then, Odunayo?
Well, I think that for the technology and enabling protest aspect, there's already been a set template that everyone can follow to make sure that they can sustain these efforts. And like ebele said, amplify each other's voices. We felt like the impact of the diaspora. So whenever this happens anywhere else, I think that Black people can be able to unite.
Okay, I can see you already stretching. Don't worry, we're almost done.
Forgive me, it's been a long day. I think from my part, I think we need to model the society that we want to see. I think that was the biggest thing I learned from the protests, which was, when the Feminist Coalition and other organizations decided to take on legal aid, ambulances, food. That was a huge model for the way peaceful protests need to be run and the way to prevent violence from overrunning the streets when we are justifiably agitating about issues. And I hope that becomes a protest template that the rest of the world adopts.
And Tomiwa?
I think a little bit related to what Yves just said. I think don't ask for permission. Just do it. And I think that's really one of the biggest sort of inspiring aspects of FEMCO was let's not ask for permission. Let's not ask for women to have a seat at the table. Let's start doing the work. Let's take our seat. I think that's an important thing from a global perspective, is you have the tools, you have the capacity to move faster, to be more creative, to do things in new ways that others can't do them. So don't ask permission, just get started. Like, we know the world it is that we want to build. We know the world we want to live in. Don't ask permission, start building it today. Use the tools you have, use the capabilities you have, and start to build the world you want to live in.
To quickly wrap that up, to amplify each other's voices, to model Nigeria's protest templates, and of course, to use the tools that you have at your disposal. Do not ask for permission, just take charge. Okay, I like that. Sorosoke. In case you don't know what Sorosoke means for our global audience, it means speak up, use your voice. And at this point, I would really like to just say thank you to all my panelists, of course, Iyinoluwa, Odunayo, Ebele, and Tomiwa. Thank you so much for taking time out to be here today. I know you're very busy people. I also want to say thank you to the Africa Center. They've been streaming this live on YouTube and Facebook, and of course the Africa Soft Power as well. And they're going to be taking this and putting it on their platform tomorrow. So in case you are just joining us, don't be scared. You can still catch up on the Africa Soft Power platform. Thank you all so much.